Hello, and thanks for downloading the inaugural episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist. This show is a little experimental, I guess you could say, so we're going to start with kind of a loose schedule. Currently, we're going to run on a bit of a monthly schedule, just to kind of see how this goes. If you think you like it and you want us to do it a bit more often, feel free to rate, review, and subscribe. Throw in some kind words for us, tell all your friends, get us a lot of downloads, and we'll see what we can do. Feel free to also go show us some support on the Patreon page, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. And if we do well there, then maybe we'll see about doing this a bit more often. But in the meantime, let me tell you what this is all about. This show is dedicated to all of the hard-working, small-town community journalists just like myself. I was in that field for almost 10 years, working for two separate newspapers. People are most familiar, of course, with all the national television networks, and then after that, they're familiar with the regional television news stations, and then also maybe even the radio jockeys. But not a lot of recognition for the small town community reporters who do their job day in and day out. And that's okay. A lot of them didn't get into it for the limelight. They did it because they have a passion for relaying the news and keeping the community informed as best they can. So that's who this is dedicated toward. And the thing that I realized was that journalists like myself, in fact, we have really just some of the most unique and truly entertaining life experiences that come from relaying just small bits of history from our communities as they happen. And that's what I thought would make for a good program, that we could just sit down and talk and just tell some of the really unique stories that we've experienced in our lives. So that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with one of my own unique experiences. It's this time that I went on an actual county-wide manhunt. Police had been searching for this guy for 2 days, and I got to go with the sheriff and be there when they brought this guy into custody. So I'm going to set the stage for you on this. It was early May, and it's West Kentucky. So anybody who lives in that area and is familiar with it and knows what the weather is like, early May is absolutely miserable. It is hot. It is muggy. It is sticky. It's just borderline unbearable. Most people didn't even want to get out of their houses, let alone go on a countywide manhunt with the police. But that's what happened. We've been reporting for a couple of days about how the police have been searching for this gentleman. I've lost track of the exact amount of time, but he had held up at least 2 different people at gunpoint. Thankfully, nobody was ever hurt, so there's a happy ending to the story there. But people were definitely on high alert. He was considered armed and extremely dangerous. School was in session, so of course they were all on lockdown while police searched for this guy. Businesses were open, but they were all watching their windows. The streets were sparsely populated, let's just say. It's the sort of thing that only comes from a small community being on alert like this. Everybody knows everybody knows what's going on, and whenever something really wild and dangerous like this happens, everybody is on edge. So I spent the day reporting, staying in touch with the sheriff, with the police, and any other people that would give us some news about what's going on. There were city police involved. There were county deputies involved. There were state troopers involved. Neighboring departments were involved. You could not look in any direction and not spot at least one squad car somewhere looking for this guy. The problem was that he was way out in the middle of the woods, just way in the sticks, and it was virtually impossible for anybody to locate him, no matter how hard that they tried. So we're staying in touch with all of these groups, just looking for updates, looking for news. And then eventually the sheriff asked us if we would be interested in somebody riding along with him as the search continued throughout the afternoon. Naturally, we were more than eager to do this. So I was the one who got to go and ride along with the sheriff for this. And the first thing that sticks out of my memory about this is as I walked out the door, it was almost like a funeral procession. Everybody who worked at that office just lined up toward the back door as I was heading towards it into the parking lot. And several of these older ladies who worked there just begged me to be careful and just watch out and just not to get hurt. I think one even, as I walked out the door, said, "Good luck." Like people were just convinced I was not going to come back alive. So that put a sort of a gloomy pall over the whole proceeding right there at the start. But from my perspective, most of it was pretty boring, frankly. I drove over to the sheriff's office and hopped into his SUV, and then we proceeded to just drive all over the county. I had grown up in this county, And we still found places I didn't even know existed. And everywhere we went, no matter how far out in the sticks or whether right in the middle of the city, everywhere we went, every person that we met knew the sheriff by name, and he knew all of them by name. It's a testament to just how interconnected small communities are, and a testament to just how connected that sheriff was with his community. I mean, there was not a single person he did not recognize, and we met a lot of people out there. I don't even know if I had met that many people personally in my life. He knew all of them. At one point, he actually got kind of serious and just confided in me. He said, I want this guy. I want him, and I want him bad. He was just acknowledging the fact that I think he really felt a sort of ownership, for lack of a better word, over that county's safety. Just like this was his community, these were his people, and as long as this guy was out there, they weren't safe. And I think he took that sort of as a personal affront to the job he was doing, just himself as a sheriff, and he wanted to succeed. He wanted to bring this guy in and let everybody, walk the streets in safety again. Personally, I think that speaks kind of highly of him. But yeah, we didn't find him. Not for a long time. There was, everywhere we looked, everywhere he went, there was nobody there. Every call over the radio, nothing. Nobody had any updates. So finally, just really discouraged, and as the afternoon is giving way into early evening, we stopped off at this little convenience store, a little mom and pop convenience store tucked away in the woods. Again, a place I didn't even know existed, despite having grown up in this county. We stopped in there just to pick up some snacks, and I got myself a bag of chips and a soda. While we were there, an Amish gentleman actually walked in, and of course, he and the sheriff both knew each other. Almost seemed like they'd grown up together, just they knew each other so well. So they shook hands, said, "Hi, how you doing?" And the sheriff asked him, "Are you aware of what's going on out there?" And the Amish gentleman said, "Not really," for obvious reasons. He said he'd seen all the squad cars roaming around, so he knew something was definitely up, but he wasn't quite sure what it was. So the sheriff filled him in. Of course, we're searching for this guy. He's armed, he's dangerous, so, if you're going to be out, be careful. And the Amish gentleman said that he would. Spotted me on the way out and waved and said hello. I said hello back. And then, we were on our way. So left the Amish gentleman and the mom and pop shop behind, hopped back in the SUV and started down the road. And it was about 2 minutes later that the radio crackled to life again, and with a report that someone had spotted the suspect less than a mile away from that very shop that we were just at. And so, just like in a movie, the sheriff slams on the brakes and just peels this SUV to make this U-turn in this 2-lane road. I'm surprised I didn't puke, because I don't handle roller coasters well anymore, and that was one of the most violent rides I had ever, turning that SUV around on a dime like that. Pulls this amazing 3-point turn and starts heading back. And within another minute of driving back, we spot the Amish gentleman on his buggy. It wasn't a traditional enclosed buggy, it was an open one. So really it was almost just like this big open wagon in the back. And as we're drawing closer, the Amish gentleman is waving at us. And then the closer we get, we realize he's not only waving, he's actually trying to subtly point in the back of his buggy. And so he stops, and the sheriff stops right next to him, and we look over in this buggy, and sure enough, there is this suspect lying on his back, just, he'd been on the run, again, in West Kentucky in early May. I can only imagine how tired this guy must have been, and just how just gross he must have felt from being in that weather. I mean, his whole face was just covered in this thick layer of sweat, not to mention just filth and twigs and brambles. I mean, he was an absolute mess. And the part that I will never forget is the sheriff just calmly looked out the window at him and said, "Excuse me, sir, are you the gentleman that we're looking for?" And the suspect looked back at him and equally as calmly said, "Yes, sir, I am." And the sheriff said, "Okay, do me a favor and stay right there." So the sheriff hops out of the car and carefully takes the man out of the buggy and puts handcuffs on him. A rather anticlimactic ending to a big, long manhunt, but really also rather appropriate for a manhunt that took place in a small town like that one. For me, what was exciting about it, in addition to, riding along and being there for all that, I actually got to jump out and get the one and only photo of this guy being taken into custody. I was the only journalist there with a camera, and I got a wonderful shot, very dynamic shot of this guy as the sheriff was putting handcuffs on him, and got a few more shots as they were ushering him over into one of the waiting squad cars. But the real money shot was most definitely that first one, that shot of him getting cuffed. That was just amazing. And I got that seconds before all the other cars just started showing up. I mean, it was like something out of a movie at that point. Squad cars from all directions just start careening towards us and just blocking us all and hemming us in. There's no way anybody's getting out of this until they let us. So from there, I went over to the Amish gentleman again and started interviewing him. And I asked him, I said, what happened exactly? How did this guy come to end up in your buggy after this big search has been going on? And he said, I'll be honest with you. He shortly after you guys left, I got in my buggy and started heading toward town. And this guy just stumbled out of the woods and asked me for a ride. And I told him I'd give him one. And I said, did he threaten you at all or anything? I mean, this guy had a gun at some point. And the Amish gentleman said, no, really, he was actually very polite. And that was that. And it was about the time that I was interviewing this Amish gentleman that other journalists showed up. There was another rival newspaper that arrived on the scene right about that point. And that was when the television news journalists showed up, and they all started taking their own photos and getting their footage and everything. But they didn't get any pictures of the suspect because he was already gone. That was all me. And one thing that was rather ironic was the next day when we put our newspaper out, of course, we had that wonderful shot that I mentioned of this guy being put in handcuffs and being led away into a squad car. Meanwhile, the rival paper, their front page photograph was of me interviewing the Amish gentleman. And I believe the television news, their footage actually had me at some point interviewing the Amish gentleman because nobody had pictures of this guy. It was only me. It was only our paper. So that was a rather cool ending for us. Kind of exciting. Although, and I do remember wondering a few times, like, are people going to think that I was the suspect? Because every time they talk about him, they show me. But anyway, that's how the story ends. Rather happy ending. Nobody was hurt, and that's what's wonderful. I've heard of manhunts since I've relocated to a new community here in Tennessee where several people were hurt and even killed in cases. So the fact that this manhunt ended without any shots fired, no injuries, no anything, really is a minor miracle. And the fact that it ended the way it did and gave me a cool story to tell, that's pretty nice too. But anyway, that's the story, and I feel like I said, I think journalists like myself who work for community newspapers, I think we've all got just these unique stories that you're not going to hear in any other major metropolitan newspaper. It's the community ones. It's the small town ones. That's where some of these just weird, hilarious, wonderful stories like this one, that's where they originate. So one thing that I want to stress, wherever you are, wherever you live, support your local newspapers. They are more important now than ever before. There is no other source of news that's going to adequately inform a community any better than a local newspaper. They're also the only way that your local politicians, your city council members, your county commissioners, even your police and your sheriffs, the only ones who are going to be there to hold them to task in any way is going to be your local community newspaper. So support them, subscribe to them, and if you know any of them, every once in a while, tell them to do a good job. They really do appreciate that sort of thing, believe it or not. So now one thing that I would like to mention, just to make a few plugs about this podcast, if I may. This program is a sister show to our first podcast, the Schorr Manor podcast, where my wife and I delved into some of our loves and stories that relate to Halloween. And of course, that will return later this year in August, if all goes well. And you can find out more about Schorr Manor on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Schorr Manor. If you need that spelled out, that's SCHORRMANOR. And we also have a Patreon page at patreon.com/Schorr Manor. Once again, feel free to go there if you'd like to show some support, help us cover the costs of podcasting and hosting. We definitely appreciate it. I think we've got some really cool rewards there to say thank you for backing us, if you will. And as for me, if you'd like to follow me, of course, you can find out all kinds of information about me on my website at mattschorr.net. That's MATTSCHORR.net. I also have a Twitter account you're welcome to follow. That's at the Matt Schorr. And I'm also on Instagram at the Schorr. And finally, if you'd like to send me a message directly, you can always email me at mattschorr@hotmail.com. I would definitely love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of this episode. If you'd like to hear more stories, and if you've got any ideas, feel free to shoot them my way. That would be fantastic. But as we bring this to a close, I just want to say one more time, thanks for listening.